Hi, I'm Ms. Matsuoka. I'm going to teach you about how to solve using the quadratic formula. So here's the quadratic formula first off. And as you can see, it uses the variables a, b, and c. They come from that equation we've talked about earlier, ax squared plus bx plus c. So your first step is to find a and b and c so that you can plug it in to the quadratic formula. From there, you're just going to simplify. Under the square root, you're going to simplify any fractions that you see, and then you're going to write it as points. Alright, let's take a look. So here's our first one. We're going to find a, b, and c first. So remember, a is what's multiplying x squared. So a is 3, b is what's multiplying the x, so b is negative 7, and c is that number by itself, so it's 2. Now I plug in. So I get x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and it's all over 2a. Okay. So we have a negative 1 times the negative 7, that gives us a positive 7 plus or minus square root of negative 7 squared is 49 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24 all over 6 because 6 is 2 times 3 down there. We get 7 plus or minus the square root of 25 all over 6. Square root of 25 is just 5. So I get, just 5 all over 6. And now I have a plus or minus. Some of you might be wondering, what does that mean? It means it's either plus or it's minus. So we have one that's plus, so 7 plus 5 all over 6, and one that's minus, 7 minus 5 over 6. So this gives me 12 over 6, which is just 2. This one gives me 2 over 6, which is 1/3. Last thing I do is I write them as points, because now it's all simplified. So I write them as points. It's 2, 0, right? Because y was 0, and then we have 1/3, 0. So you might wonder, why would you use the quadratic formula, or when do you use the quadratic formula? You really want to use it when you can't factor. This problem is not a very good example. We could have factored this. We could easily get these numbers by factoring, but I wanted to show you about what it looks like when you can actually simplify. So you're still doing the same thing. We're still trying to find those x-intercepts, which is why my y-coordinate is still 0 on these, just like it was when I did it by factoring. But a lot of the times you're going to be left with a square root, which is why it's important to use the quadratic formula so that you can always solve, even when you can't factor. Okay, here's our next one. So again, we find a, b, and c. A is just 1, because 1 is the number multiplying x squared. B is negative 1, and c is 3. Again, I plug into my quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Again, I have negative times a negative is a positive 1 plus or minus square root of 1 minus 12 all over 2, and I keep simplifying. 1 plus or minus square root of negative 11, that's 1 minus 12, all over 2. Right now, we cannot take the square root of a negative number. It's just not possible, right? Because any number times itself will never equal a negative number. So because of this, this is going to be no solution because this cannot be done. We cannot take the square root of a negative number. Okay, so you'll learn more about this in Algebra 2 when we actually work with stuff that can give you a negative number. But for now, no solution. Okay, last example problem here. So we have A, that's negative 2, B is 8, C is negative 1, and we plug in x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. All right, so we have negative 8 plus or minus square root of 64 minus, okay, so this is a negative 4 times negative 2 is a positive 8 times negative 1 gives me a negative 8 here, all over negative 4 here. So that's negative 8 plus or minus square root of 56 all over negative 4. Okay, so right now we can do something. We can simplify this more. There's no perfect square for 56, but there is a perfect square in there, okay? So if you recall earlier, like in class, we've done problems like this where we broke up a square root. We're doing the same thing here, okay? So this, we can look at it a couple different ways. The way I'm going to look at it, I'm just going to show you on the side. 56 is 14 times 4. The reason I broke it up like this is because I can take the square root of 4, okay? Yeah, I can't take the square root of 14, but I can take the square root of 4. So I want something that I can take the square root of. That way, I can just simplify it more. So the square root of 4 gives me 2. So the 2 is going to come on the outside here. Again, I cannot take the square root of 14, so it stays in there, okay? All right, now I'm going to continue to simplify this. So this is negative 8 plus or minus. I'm just taking what I have here. So 2 square root of 14 all over negative 4. Now if you look here, all 3 of these numbers are divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide all of them by 2 here. I don't do anything under the square root, okay? So I ignore this 14, but I'm dividing everything else by 2. So that divided by 2 gives me a negative 4. This divided by 2 just gives me 2. That divided by 2 gives me negative 2. So in total, I have a negative 4 plus or minus, 2 divided by 2 gives me 1, not 2. Sorry about that. Okay, so negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 14 all over negative 2. Now I'm going to write this as points. So remember, I have it with 0 at the end. So I have negative 4 plus or minus square root of 14 all over negative 2, comma 0. And then I have the, I only want one version at a time. So one's the plus one, and one's going to be the minus one. Okay, all over negative 2, comma 0. So those are my answers. Now, it's important to note that whenever you actually take the square root of something, it's no longer under the square root. So right here, once we took the square root of the 4, the 2 came out, right? It's no longer under the square root. Same thing over here in that first problem. When I take the square root of the 25, it just becomes 5. It comes out of the square root because I already took the square root of it. So those are the important things to remember. Here is your bonus question. I do want you to solve using the quadratic formula. Remember, if there's a negative under that square root, it's no solution. But otherwise, make sure you simplify, and good luck.